Okay, everybody, this is Sheets, and I'm going to be going over the, I guess, this is the Friday slate, the NBA, in preparation for the weekend, where I probably won't, who knows, I might come on for a Saturday NBA slate. I don't think so, but maybe. Bobby continues to enjoy himself in Costa Rica. Hopefully he's feeling better. I know he had some health issues yesterday, not a big deal. So today we have a very, very compact 5-game slate, which to me is very, very straightforward. That doesn't make it easy, but it's straightforward. There's a couple of games that kind of stand out, and there's obviously one play that stands out, which we're going to have to figure out what to do with. So I am going to kind of go game by game, and some of the games, though, I might kind of, I don't want to say skip over, but you'll see why in a few minutes. And as usual, I hope to bring a little more than just the game by game and slate review to this presentation, because there are a couple of things I want to go over that apply to all DFS and all of everything. I would like to give a shout out, by the way, to an old poker guy. I saw a tweet, a good result on DFS was Randers last night, had a good result on FanDuel. Good for him. I hadn't touched base with him in a long time. Good guy, and it's always good to see the old poker OGs continue to succeed. I don't know if he continued to succeed, but he certainly got there the other day, so good for him. So Oklahoma City, Charlotte, this is a tough spot for Oklahoma City, just coming off a very, very, very tough back-to-back in that they played last night. It was a tough comeback game. Did they fall a little bit short? It was a very, very tough game. Let's put it that way. We had a bunch of that game. So it was against Memphis, and it was kind of a rough game to watch, if you want to know the truth. I thought they were going to come back. I thought they were going to do it, and then it just didn't quite get there. So on a back-to-back, it's always kind of tough. And as none of these guys really project to be all that great today. Oklahoma City, you could look at Shea is the best of, kind of an okay group of alternatives. Steven Adams, Dennis Schroeder, Chris Paul, Nerlens Noel.
Here's a result from the web.
All right. Nerlens Noel. I got my OK Google going right now. So none of these guys look to be particularly great. I mean, if you fall to one of these guys as a one-off, again, you'd have to figure out what kind of one-off you wanted. Like Shea would be kind of the safer type of one-off. Then Schroeder would have a little more upside. Depends on which way you want to go. On the Charlotte side, Devontae Graham looks okay, not great. And Terry Rozier looks okay, but not great. So nobody's that appealing to me. And what I'd love to have is a situation where guys from both teams look really good, so I can stack them. But it just doesn't look like it's going to happen with this particular game. So you can always make a case for Devontae Graham as being an upside guy to throw in a lineup. But I think you'll see that the way construction works on today's slate, I don't think that's where you're going to go. Although you might. Hold on to that thought, because we might end up using someone like Devontae Graham later. Next game, Philadelphia-Orlando. I will throw this out to you. Again, Bobby and I talk about narratives, talk about the human element sometimes, and I do believe that there's a certain amount of human element not accounted in the projections. But I do want to, again, I said this in my NFL review, I want to give a shout out. I mean, there are people that talk about this, and one very, very smart dude said, when confronted with narratives, he said, listen, I'm not saying it's not there. I just don't know how to project it. So I just have to ignore it. So he's right and he's wrong. You know what I mean? Like, yes, it's very difficult to quantify the humanness of these plays, but just because you can't quantify it doesn't mean it shouldn't be accounted for in some way, right? Even though you can't exactly figure out why XYZ should be more motivated, even though you can't figure out exactly why or to what extent somebody's motivation will impact his effort. Even though you can't quantify, it doesn't mean you can't at least show some nuance, right? In giving the guy a little bit of bump in your assessment, all right? So with that said, Philadelphia is coming off of just a marquee win on Christmas, in front of the world. Joel Embiid owned Giannis. Okay, the team owned him. The team was prepared. They backed off him. They challenged him to make threes, and when he couldn't make threes, he tried to drive, and Embiid was there. Embiid really owned him on this particular occasion. And that he wanted that. We talked about Embiid's motivation recently, and I even said, listen, you just don't want to mess with Embiid right now. He's completely motivated every game. And this was the culmination of that, okay? So with that said, I mean, to me, this is just a perfect time for a letdown. It really is. I mean, coming off the Christmas Day game at home, against Milwaukee, kicking the crap out of them, putting your mark on your role, on your position as maybe an all-NBA type player, to then have to go down to freaking Orlando to play in a game like this, it's just got to be awful. I just, while Embiid could end up being low-owned on this slate, so again, ownership can kind of trump this analysis, but he's someone I just have to think is going to have some kind of letdown, as will the whole team. So I'm going to be predisposed to go against these guys. Now, what that means is if they project really well and they're low-owned, then my narrative I don't care about, right? But if they project poorly and they're highly owned, then I will fade them just completely. Now, as it turns out, they project pretty bad, okay? And I presume that their ownership is going to be pretty low, right, as a result. So I'm probably neutral on them, but I'm not going to go out of my way to play anybody from Philadelphia in this game. I will say that from a projections standpoint, Tobias Harris and Embiid do project to be kind of just semi-neutral values in a similar way as guys that we talked about with Charlotte and OKC, so no big deal. On the Orlando side, the one guy that's projected to be a good value is going to be Vooch. It's a rough spot. I don't know if I can get there, but we'll see, because the way these roster constructions are going to play out, you might end up going for these $7,700 guys, depending on what you want to do in the next game. Next 3 games. So Vooch does look like a good play, and no one else from Orlando. So I would include Vooch as my list of players that I might want to throw in. I would rather play him, if this makes any sense, than Embiid, just because he projects better, and I do think that these Christmas Day teams might have a little bit of a letdown in them. Okay, no, I can't quantify that. No, I can't project that, and no, I can't prove that. But that's just my experience, and and knowing how things work in life and in sports. I would be more inclined to expect a letdown. And you know what? If they're not going to be high projecting low-owned guys, then I'm going to just go with that. So moving on to this Milwaukee-Atlanta game. So here's the deal. Giannis, let's look at it 2 ways. Giannis just came off the game where he got, I don't want to say embarrassed. I mean, whatever. I mean, he left his heart on the floor, and he did score 50 fantasy points, and he did do whatever. But he was owned in this game. And he must have been very, very upset about this, and it was in front of the entire world. And, this was a team that casual fans had been hearing about how amazing they were, and yet they show up on national TV and get waxed with their best player getting destroyed by Embiid like that. So, you could look at it one of 2 ways. You could look at it as, oh, boy, he's going to let down from that. Or the most likely way you could look at it is that he's going to be very, very mad, okay? And against an Atlanta team that is a team that, people like to play against, it's a really tough spot for a team to try to defend him. You know what I mean? You get a mad Giannis against a bad defensive team anyway. I mean, it's rough. And as a result of that, he's projecting completely through the roof. I mean, he's projecting, depends on where you look, between 15 to 20 points higher than the next highest scorer, just on a raw points basis. Not to mention that his price is only 11.3, putting him as the top value on the slate by just an incredible amount. So that's going to be your issue, is whether you lock him in or whether you fade him, and if you fade him, to what extent. Because he is going to be, I would say, somewhere between 33 and 50% owned. And if, in fact, you do fade him, are you going to be able to replace those points with other players? And that's why I don't completely discount Embiid yet, because I have to figure out if I'm going to be able to replace those Giannis points with other points somewhere. But, we'll see if we could do that. So obviously one way you could go with this whole slate, and I'm probably going to do it a couple of builds, one with Giannis, one without, and stuff like that, is you could obviously, Giannis is probably the best player on the slate. The other Milwaukee pieces, I'm not going to do FanDuel, but I will tell you that Brook Lopez, once again, looks like a good play on FanDuel. Probably not my favorite cheap play at that position on FanDuel, but he looks like a good one. On DraftKings, he just doesn't look that great. And Middleton, again, don't game watch or game log too much, because he did score, although he did smash on Christmas for about 50 fantasy points. Pause this for just a second. Sorry about that. So to finish off this game, so Middleton, he did score 50 fantasy points. I mean, a good amount of that were basically in the last 4 minutes, and that counts, obviously. But he is projected to be a pretty good value. So if you did want to go a middling build, you could certainly go with Middleton in this spot. I don't think there's enough ceiling to put them both in, unless you were going to run it back with Atlanta guys. And I don't know if I'm going to do that, So I know the logic. I mean, you go to the other side and you see the two best plays are going to be Collins and Young, and they project to be about the same as guys that we talked about already, like Vooch, and I know the different positions, but just from a value perspective, Vooch and Graham and Shea and guys like that. So if you're going to do that, you're going to be spending a lot of salary to get this stack in between Giannis, Collins, and Young, and I think it's spending an awful lot of salary. And when you look at the value you're going to have to go to get all these guys in, it's kind of ugly out there. So I don't think that this is going to be the game that I stack. And I know the logic. If you want to get Giannis his, those 70 points, you're going to want to get more than that. It's going to be because Atlanta keeps it close. Not necessarily, because we're only projecting him, Giannis, for about 32 minutes. So he's probably going to get those 32 minutes whether it's close or not. You know what I mean? So the projection of whatever points he's projected for, between 65 and 70, I guess, is not based on the game staying close. And on a slate like this, you're not going to complain if you get the 65 out of Giannis, because you'll be able to get, probably going to be able to get some value and get some upside elsewhere. So it's not like you need the game to stay close to get your Giannis points. Because you're already projecting at 32. What you could argue is if the game does stay close, then you get maybe 3 or 4 more minutes from Giannis. So that's the logic is, boy, I'm gonna want Trae Young to exceed his median. I'm gonna want Collins to exceed his median so that I can get Giannis those extra 3 or 4 minutes. And that is certainly one way to think about it. Let me just create an alternative universe about the way the game could stay close. The other way the game can stay close is if Giannis is just not very good and that he underperforms his median. And the Trae Youngs and the John Collins, they just approach their median. That's another way the game could stay close. So you could do this, but I think this is a very expensive way to stack, considering there's a lot of really good mid-range value coming up a little bit later. So while normally you take a game like this, I might throw a stack or two in, I don't think I'm going to go there this particular slate. Moving on, Indiana, Miami. As you might imagine, this game's a little, I would say, on the ugly side, but it's just not like your premier type game. It's a low total. I mean, it is a close spread, so you have that big, but let's take a look at this. On the Indiana side, not surprisingly, Sabonis, Brogdon, looking to be kind of okay values, nothing special. just again, just along the same lines as those other guys like Shea and Devontae Graham and Vooch. Actually, Vooch is a better value than both of these guys. All the Philly guys. So all these guys are just kind of similar as far as value goes. Now, with respect to ownership, we're going to have to see which of those guys are highly owned. But I mean, Butler is going to be 20. It looks like about 20%. Sabonis about 20%. So it's not any real bargain going to these guys. So again, it's a bad combination. It's a bad combination of bad projection or just blah projection, blah ownership, just not a lot of great correlation. You know, it's just not that great of a spot. Miami, all right, 2 guys, actually 2.5 guys. So Butler and Bam both project to be, and I hate to say this, but again, just very similar to that whole group. You know, don't blame me. I mean, I'm not trying to say pick any of these guys, but it's just the way the projection systems work out for a slate like this is that a lot of these guys are just kind of bunched. I mean, if you sort whichever projection system you look at by values, these guys are all going to look very similar. So if you're going to play these guys, what I would say is this. If you're going to play Butler, maybe you should play him with someone from Indiana, right? Because if you're going to want to get upside from him, maybe you get a run back with the Indiana guys. So that would be my advice, is that if you're going to play a guy like Butler or Bam, I would probably either run it back with one of these Indiana guys like Sabonis or either Sabonis or Brogdon. Assuming Brogdon's in. Game time call? Oh, good grief. Well, we'll talk about that another time. But if he's out again, then you got to look at Aaron Holiday and how he ended up 10% owned or 15% owned in the last game after Brogdon was ruled out is beyond me. So don't screw that up. Actually, he's going to be 5,400 this time, so he's not going to be a complete lock. So definitely look at that. But again, nothing too exciting. All right, so I guess I should have started with this, but island game, late hammer, however you want to put it. This Phoenix Golden State game is really where all the action is on this slate. And this is where you have to kind of start if you're going to play like I play, where you're looking for game stacks, because you have tremendously good plays on both sides of this game. So, I mean, you may as well just go through them. So on the Phoenix side, it's going to be your 4 top guys. Well, it's going to put them in just so I show you. It's going to be Booker. It's going to be an incredibly well-valued Aaron Baines. It's going to be Ricky Rubio, who's currently questionable. I'm going to put him in his list of players I'm looking at now. It's going to be, so let's put Rubio in, and we're going to put Booker in over here. So it's going to be these 4 guys. If you wanted to go down to Saric, you could do that. And then, I mean, these guys look to be just, first of all, they look to project from a value perspective a little better than these other guys we've been talking about, those middle-of-the-road guys. And they're all on the same team, so they have just incredible correlation. And the other side, you have 2.5, but I would say 2 guys who just look really, really good. One is going to be D'Angelo Russell, and the other one is going to be a very, very affordable and good Willie Cauley-Stein. Okay, so Draymond Green looks to be okay, and as I say always, Draymond Green is the, you always want to, I don't want to say ignore projections, but you want to, give a little leeway with projections when it comes to guys like Draymond, because he is just one of those like high standard deviation, upside type guys. Okay. Now the issue is from an ownership perspective, all these guys are going to be kind of highly owned. Like I see D'Angelo Russell about 35%, Willie Cauley-Stein about 30%, Booker and Baines both about 25%, Oubre about 20%. Okay. But the thing is that then it goes back to my original thesis. If you fade Giannis at 50% ownership, is it possible that you already have enough leverage that you don't have to worry about playing these guys at whether these guys are low owned or not? okay? So I think this is definitely the way to start, is by stacking up this game and then making the determination of what else you want to do. See, because the thing is this, like if you play, here's the, I would say the problem, what makes it interesting. Like if you play Giannis, you can play some guys from this game, but you can't play them all, right? Because it's not like these guys are that cheap. And the problem is, like, if you don't play Russell to get yourself some salary over here, you'll find that the value in these other games that we looked at doesn't really, I don't know if it doesn't exist, but it's going to be very difficult to find value. Just do me a bit, run some optimals on your own with Giannis. Just put Giannis in, for example, and just run optimals. You'll see some very uncomfortable players that you might have to play, okay? And I don't know if you need or want to do that on a slate like this where you have this really, really strong value in this game, okay? It really does fit everything I look at, with the one exception, okay? It's a late game, great. It's a close game, great. It's got value on both sides, great. The other thing is that you don't have a lot of correlation issues, right? All these guys kind of have their roles. You're not going to worry about D'Angelo Russell correlating with Willie Cauley-Stein. You're not going to worry about, you know, well, you might have some Rubio Booker issues, but you're not going to have Oubre issues. You're not going to have Baines issues. Maybe what you could do is go, on the one end, I was going to say, why don't you do one of two, Booker or Rubio, but I find it difficult to keep Booker out of any game stacks, just considering the way his results distribute. He's always going to be part of my Phoenix game stacks. So the issue is when you know, if you don't play Giannis, right, it just opens yourself up to being able to play all of those other type of guys that we talked about, right? So if you play, you know, just three, like that's not a lot. If you play three Phoenix guys and two of these guys, you can go after some of these, you know, 6K-ish type guys we talked about, like Schroeder, Alexander. You could even go to Devontae Graham. You could go to to Middleton. You know, you're fading Giannis. Maybe you use Middleton. You could play where was it? You could play Vooch. I don't know what happened to him. But you could play Vooch in the as guard. You could play Vooch here. So that's the thing. Like if you play Giannis, he's definitely the best play, but you don't get to play these guys in game stacks. Okay? You can play these guys as one-offs if you want. Okay? But the thing is Russell at 7,400, he's a guy you're going to want, and paying that 7,400 makes it difficult to get Giannis in. Okay, and you'll see when you go through your builds how this works. Like even if you did something like this, and you use Booker and Oubre and Baines, and you didn't, even if you threw out Russell, which you don't want to do in a game stack, and he projects so well, you want to use him. There wasn't a lot of $5,400 value to kind of go to. Then you'd have to start thinking about guys like Kevin Huerter, who looks okay, but the drop down from a value perspective from some of these Phoenix Golden State guys to guys like Kevin Huerter is, I believe, significant. So for me, this is a very, very interesting slate where you could attack it one of two ways. I mean, obviously there's more than one of two ways to attack it, but I think the decisions you're going to have to make, I mean, what I am, is going to be how much am I going to stack this Phoenix game and eschew and toss out Giannis in those lineups, or am I going to find a way to partially stack the Phoenix Golden State game and find a way to cram Giannis in those lineups, or maybe just set some rule where I threw a min one Phoenix and min one Golden State and use Giannis in those lineups. So those are going to be the different types of builds that I'm going to probably go after on a slate like this. So for me, you know, life is never that easy, but at least from a slate perspective, you know, it looks like a very straightforward approach, at least as far as I'm concerned. So I guess that's really all I had. I don't know whether this was short or long. It seemed like it was very short, but again, to me, it all kind of looks pretty self-explanatory. Now, with that said, you know, uh, news can come out, ownership can change, but I think that, you know what I think the answer is? If you are going to play these guys, I don't think you could play Giannis with them just because of the ownership. Because I don't think you can play high-owned guys from this game with Giannis. That becomes way too chalky. I think what you're going to have to do is make a decision between whether you play all these guys and then go low-owned elsewhere or lower-owned elsewhere, or play Giannis and kind of try to fade these really good values in the Phoenix game. Okay. Guess that's all I had. Have a really good weekend if I don't come back and pop something on Saturday. And I guess that's it.